Maya Torres sat in the command chair of the Eternal Sentinel and watched the stars. Through the viewport with tired eyes and a mind that never rested even during the quiet hours of patrol duty along the forbidden border, where human space ended, and the rest of the galaxy began, or rather where the rest of the galaxy had told humanity to stay away thousands of years ago, when their ancestors had been cast out like criminals for crimes they still debated in history classes, the Dreadnought hummed around her with the familiar sounds of a ship that had been her home for 5 years, and she knew every creak and vibration like the rhythm of her own heartbeat and right. Now something felt wrong in a way she could not name, but had learned to trust during her years in the fleet. Her second officer, Kane Brooks, looked up from his console with confusion crossing his face, and then concern, replacing it quickly as numbers scrolled across his screen faster than normal. The sensors are picking up something strange, Captain Torres, and it does not match anything in our database, and it just crossed the border from Concord space into our territory without authorization or any kind of signal. Maya leaned forward in her chair and felt her pulse quicken because unauthorized crossings were rare and usually meant trouble of the worst kind since the Celestial Concord had made it very clear over the centuries that humans were to stay in their corner of space and never return to the galactic core where civilized species lived and prospered without the chaos that humans supposedly brought wherever they went. Do what we have and get tactical ready just in case this is not a friendly visit. The main screen shifted to show a vessel. That made Maya catch her breath, because she had never seen anything like it in all her years of service, and it looked less like a ship and more like something alive with curves of crystalline material that seemed to pulse with inner light like bone that had been grown rather than built, and it moved through space with a grace that human ships could never match them. The ship was small compared to the Eternal Sentinel, but it radiated power in a way that made Maya nervous, and more than that. It was trailing energy signatures that suggested damage and recent weapons fire, and whatever this thing was, it had been in a fight and lost, or at least had not won cleanly enough to avoid getting hurt. Captain, we are picking up life signs aboard that vessel, and they are faint, and there is something else, and the computer is having trouble classifying it, but the readings suggest something biological and large and possibly a creature of some kind. Maya felt her instincts screaming at her that this was important, and possibly the most important thing that would happen in her career, or possibly in human history, but she kept her voice calm and professional as she gave orders. Hail them on all frequencies and let them know we see them, and that they are in human space without permission, but that we are willing to talk before we do anything else. The communications officer worked for several long moments before shaking her head with frustration. They are not responding, Captain, but we are picking up automated distress signals in a language the computer is trying to translate, and it appears to be ancient Elvish from the Concord homeworlds, and the message repeats the same thing over and over about pursuers and danger and requesting sanctuary from those who remember the old betrayals. Maya felt cold spread through her chest because elves were part of the Concord leadership and had been among those who voted to exile humanity, and now one of them was asking humans for help, and that made no sense unless something had gone very wrong in ways that humans knew nothing about. Behind the damaged vessel, space began to shimmer and tear as 3 larger ships emerged from faster-than-light travel with weapons already charging and their hulls marked with the symbols of Concord enforcement fleets, and they moved with purpose toward the smaller crystalline ship-like hunters closing on wounded prey. This is Captain Maya Torres of the human vessel Eternal Sentinel, and you are in human territory, and we demand you power down weapons and state your intentions. The Concord ships ignored her completely, as if humans were beneath notice, or perhaps because they simply did not care what humans thought about anything, and their weapons locked onto the smaller vessel with clear intent. Maya had perhaps 3 seconds to make a decision that would either start a war or save a life, and she thought about her daughter Sophie back on Bastion Prime and the future she wanted for her, and whether that future was better served by following rules that had kept humanity safe but small for thousands of years, or by taking a risk that might change everything. All weapons online and shields to maximum and move us between the Concord ships and that damaged vessel. Now her crew moved without hesitation because they trusted her, and the Eternal Sentinel surged forward with its massive bulk. Positioning between the hunters and their prey, and Maya opened a channel too. The Concorde ships with her heart pounding, but her voice steady this. Vessel has requested sanctuary in human space, and we are granting it. And you will not fire while we are in the way, and if you want them, you will have to go through us first. For a long moment, nothing happened, and the Concorde ships held position as if the minds controlling them could not process what they were seeing, because humans never interfered and never challenged the Concorde, and certainly never protected their enemies then. The lead Concorde ship fired, and Maya felt the impact against their shields, and knew that everything had just changed in ways that could never be undone. Return. Fire and disable their weapons, but do not destroy them, and get a tractor beam on that damaged ship, and bring it into our bay. Now the Eternal Sentinel had been built by a species that spent thousands of years preparing for the day. They might need to fight their way back into a galaxy that had rejected them, and every system had been designed with brutal efficiency, and the weapons that human engineers created were not elegant, but they were very good at breaking things. Concorde ships had better technology and more experience, but they had grown comfortable in their superiority. And they were not ready for the sheer aggressive determination that humans brought to every fight, and within minutes, 2 of them were crippled and drifting, while the third retreated back across the border with damage trailing from its hull. The crystalline ship came aboard the Eternal Sentinel on the tractor beam, and Maya was already moving toward the bay with a security team because she needed to see with her own eyes. She had just started a war to protect the ship rested in the bay like a dying bird, and up close Maya could see the damage was worse than sensors had shown, with cracks running through the crystalline hull and scorch marks from weapons that burned with energies human science barely understood. The ship opened without prompting, and a ramp extended downward, like an invitation, or perhaps a surrender. Being that walked down the ramp was tall and graceful, with features that were almost human but too perfect and symmetrical in ways that marked her as other, and her armor was damaged and burned, and she moved with the careful steps of someone holding on to consciousness. Through sheer will behind her came something that made Maya forget to breathe. The creature was the size of a large horse, but its body was covered in scales that shifted color from deep purple to gold to crimson, and wings folded against its sides that looked like they belonged on something much larger, and its head was noble and intelligent, with eyes that held an awareness. That was definitely not animal. A dragon, and Maya had thought they were extinct, or perhaps it's just legends that other species told to frighten children. The elf woman reached the bottom of the ramp and looked at Maya with eyes that were too old for it. Her face held depths of sorrow and determination that Maya recognized from her own mirror. I am Lyra, Starweaver of the Celestial Concorde, and this is Ember, my bonded companion, and we bring word of a threat that will destroy your species, and mine and every other thinking being in this galaxy, if we do not act, and I know humans have no reason to trust me or my people, but I am asking you to listen because we are running out of time. The dragon made a sound that was somewhere between a growl and a song, and its eyes fixed on Maya with intelligence that was almost frightening. Maya looked at this elf and her dragon and thought about the Concorde ships that had just attacked her vessel, and the fact that her career was probably over, and that she had just made herself and her crew into either heroes or traitors, depending on how the next few hours went. Start talking and convince me why I should not put you in a cell and hand you over to my superiors, who will probably want to use you as a bargaining chip. With the Concorde, Lyra swayed on her feet, and the dragon moved closer to support her with its body, and Maya saw blood seeping through the elf's armor in places she had not noticed before. The Concorde, is already dead and replaced by something ancient and hungry and evil, and it has been consuming civilization since before your species learned to make fire, and it exiled humanity because you were the only ones who ever resisted its influence, and now it wants to make sure you never get the chance to do so. Again, Maya felt the words hit her like a physical blow, because they explained so much about history that had never quite made sense, and she looked at her security team and then back at Lyra, and made another decision that would change everything. Get medical down here now and prepare a secure room with everything they need, and we are going to Bastion Prime, and the Council of Founders is going to hear what she has Bastion Prime hung in space like a promise and a warning combined into one massive fortress world that humanity had built from the scraps of their exile, and every human who saw it for the first time felt pride and pain together because it represented both how far they had come and how much they had lost. Maya stood on the bridge as the Eternal Sentinel approached the planet, and she knew that word of what had happened at the border had already reached the Council of Founders, and that her reception would be complicated at best and career-ending at worst. But she also knew that Lyra and Ember represented something too important to ignore, even if it cost. Maya, everything she had worked for with medical team had stabilized Lyra during the journey. But the elf woman remained weak, and Ember had not left her side for even a moment, and the dragon had proved to be far more intelligent than anyone expected, with the ability to communicate through images and feelings that the medical staff found both fascinating and unsettling. Landing permission came through with instructions to proceed directly to the council chambers, with the guests under heavy security, and Maya could read between the lines that the council was divided and afraid and probably arguing among themselves about what to do with an elf who brought both opportunity and danger in equal measure. The council chamber was built into the heart of Bastion Prime, deep underground, where no weapon could reach, and the room itself was circular, with seats arranged so that everyone could see everyone else, and no one could hide behind rank or position. Counselor Victoria Hayes sat with her arms crossed and her face set in lines of deep suspicion, and she had made her views about aliens very clear over the years, and especially about the species that had exiled humanity, and now one of those species was asking for help. And Victoria looked like she wanted to throw Lyra out the nearest airlock. Admiral Helen Carter sat with the patience of someone who had fought in more battles than most people could count, and she watched Lyra with the eyes of a warrior evaluating another warrior, and Maya thought she saw respect there, even if it was grudging and mixed with caution. President Luna Williams sat at the center of the council, and she was young for a president, but she had been elected because she represented a generation that had grown up hearing stories of exile, but had never seen the Concord firsthand, and she wanted answers more than she wanted. Revenge. Lyra stood before them with Ember at her side, and despite her injuries and exhaustion, she carried herself with dignity that even Victoria Hayes could not completely dismiss. President Williams spoke first, and her voice carried through the chamber with authority. Captain Torres has given us a preliminary report, but we want to hear directly from you. Why an elf warrior and a dragon that we thought was extinct have come to humanity for help when your people spent thousands of years telling us we were too dangerous to exist near civilized species. Lyra took a breath, and Maya saw her hand rest on Ember's neck for support, both physical and emotional. My people made a terrible mistake when we exiled humanity, and we did so because we were afraid and corrupted and blind to the real threat that had already begun to consume us from within. And now that threat controls the Concord and uses our ships and our laws and our prejudices to spread across the galaxy like a disease. Shay activated a projection device she had brought, and holographic images filled the chamber, showing Concord leaders in council meetings and military briefings and diplomatic functions. Watch their eyes and watch how they move and speak, and you will see what I saw when I began to suspect something was wrong. The images showed leaders whose eyes held no light or warmth, and who moved with a synchronization that was unnatural, and whose speeches contained subtle contradictions that suggested multiple minds trying to inhabit single bodies. These are the Void Eaters. And they are parasites that exist partially in our dimension and partially in another, and they consume civilizations by taking control of key individuals and using them to spread fear and division until entire species collapse from within. Victoria Hayes leaned forward with skepticism clear on her face. We are supposed to believe this because you show us some recordings that could be faked, and some story about parasites from another dimension. And why would these Void Eaters exile humanity if we were resistant to them? And why not just kill us? Lyra met her eyes without flinching, because killing you would have created martyrs and made other species ask questions, but exiling you is dangerous and unstable. Accomplished two goals at once, and it removed the one species that had natural resistance to their control, and it created a warning to other species about what happens when you resist. Concord Authority, Ember made a sound that drew every eye in the chamber, and the dragon's scales shifted through colors that somehow conveyed sadness and anger combined. Admiral Carter spoke for the first time, and her voice was thoughtful. The child bonds with the emotions, and she is right to be angry, because my people encountered something similar generations ago. Before we became part of the Concord, and we called them the Whispers, and they nearly destroyed us before we found a way to fight back using creatures like Ember, who exist partially outside normal space and can see the parasites for what they are. She paused and looked at Lyra. With new understanding, that is why they hunted the star dragons to near extinction, and they could not control a species that could reveal them, and you bonded with one of the last, and that made you able to see the truth. Lyra nodded, and for the first time since entering the chamber, she showed emotion beyond dignity and determination. I was a loyal soldier of the Concord until Ember found me and chose me as her bonded, and the moment we connected, I could see through her eyes, and I saw the parasites attached to my commanders and my leaders and people I had trusted with my life, and I knew I had to run, and I had to find someone who could help fight them. President Williams stood and walked closer to Lyra and studied her. Why humanity, and why not go to other species within the Concord who might believe you? Because the Void Eaters fear you, and I reasoned that anything they fear enough to exile might be strong enough to fight them, and also because I found old records that showed humanity had encountered them before during your early expansion, and you fought them off through sheer, stubborn refusal to surrender, even when it seemed hopeless. Maya felt pride swell in her chest, despite the gravity of the situation, because that sounded exactly like humanity. Council debated for hours while Lyra and Ember waited with patience, and Maya stood by as both witness and defender of her decision to bring them. Herr Victoria Hayes argued for caution and for using Lyra as a bargaining chip to negotiate better terms with the Concord Admiral. Carter argued for taking the threat seriously. In preparing for war, President Williams listened to all sides and then made her decision. We will verify everything Lyra has told us, and Captain Ramirez will work directly with her to gather more intelligence, and if what she says is true, then humanity will face a choice between staying safe in our corner of space or taking the fight to an enemy that wants us dead. Regardless, she looked at Lyra with determination. But understand this clearly, and if you betray us, or if this is some elaborate trap, then there will be nowhere in this galaxy you can hide from human vengeance. Lyra bowed her head in acknowledgement. I expect nothing less, and I would do the same in your position. The council session ended, and Maya was assigned quarters near Lyra and Ember, with orders to keep them under observation, but also to learn everything she could about the Void Eaters and Concord defenses. Over the following days, Maya and Lyra worked together, reviewing intelligence and planning reconnaissance missions. And slowly the tension between them began to ease into something like professional respect. Maya found herself fascinated by Lyra's different perspective on tactics and honor, while Lyra seemed intrigued by human directness and willingness to question authority. Sophie Torres came to visit her mother and met Ember for the first time, and the dragon and the young engineer formed an immediate connection that surprised everyone. Sophie had always been brilliant with machines and systems, but she understood Ember in ways that even Lyra found remarkable, and within days she was designing new flight systems that could work with dragon physiology and talking about possibilities that no one had considered. Then came the night when everything changed. Maya was reviewing reports in her quarters when alarms began screaming through the facility, and her combat instincts took over before her conscious mind caught up. Security breach in the residential sector, and multiple hostiles moving toward Lyra's quarters with lethal intent. Maya grabbed her weapons and ran through corridors that echoed with gunfire and screaming, and she reached Lyra's quarters to find the door blown open and the elf woman fighting desperately against attackers in Concord uniforms whose eyes held that empty quality that Lyra had warned about. Timber roared and plasma burst from her mouth, turning two attackers to ash, but more kept coming, and Maya added her weapons to the fight, and suddenly the battle became personal. In ways that military engagements never were, she fought beside Lyra with a coordination that should not have been possible between two people who barely knew each other, but somehow they moved together like they had trained for years. And when one of the attackers got past Maya's guard, It was Lyra who took the hit meant for her. Starhold Station hung in the void like a monument to oppression and cruelty, and it had been built by the UCS Concord centuries ago as a prison for those who asked to. Many questions or discovered truths that the leadership wanted hidden, and now Maya. Torres looked at it through the tactical display and felt cold determination settle into her bones. Station was massive with defenses that would make a frontal assault suicide, but Maya had not gotten to where she was by choosing easy paths. And beside her stood Lyra Starweaver, fully recovered from her injuries and radiating quiet confidence that came from knowing this mission would either save thousands or doom them a lember. Had grown significantly in the weeks since arriving at Bastion Prime, and the Dragon was now large enough to carry multiple riders, and her scales had deepened in color, till they looked like captured starlight in solid form, and her bond with Sophie Torres had become so strong that the young engineer could sense the Dragon's thoughts almost as clearly as Lyra could. The plan was audacious and risky, and exactly the kind of thing that made Victoria Hayes shake her head and mutter about human recklessness, but even she had admitted they had no choice, because the intelligence suggested Starhold contained not just political prisoners, but also key figures from multiple species who had discovered the Void Eater infiltration and been silenced. Admiral Carter commanded the main fleet that would engage the Concord Defense Forces, while Maya led the strike team directly into the station, supported by Lyra and her small group of elf rebels who had followed her into exile over the past weeks, as word spread through underground networks about what was happening. The journey to Starhold took 3 days, and Maya used that time to drill her teams until they could execute the plan in their sleep, because she knew from experience that no plan survived contact with the enemy but training. And discipline could make the difference between victory and discipline. Spent hours with Maya, going over station layouts and guard rotations and weak points in the security systems, and slowly their professional relationship evolved into something deeper and more personal as they shared stories about their lives and their losses and their hopes for a future that seemed increasingly unlikely one. Night Maya found Lyra standing alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars, and she joined her without speaking for several long moments. My people exiled yours because we were afraid, and because something evil whispered in our ears that humans were dangerous, and we listened because it was easier than facing our own fears, and now I fight beside you against that same evil. And I wonder if we could have been allies all along if we had just been brave enough to try. Maya thought about that, and about Sophie, and the future she wanted for her daughter. Fear makes people do terrible things, and but so does courage, and right now we need courage more than safety, and whatever happens at Starhold, we will face it together. Lyra turned to look at her, and in the starlight her features seemed almost human, and Maya found herself thinking thoughts that had no place in her mind when they were about to risk everything in a desperate assault together. Then, and may the stars guide us. Attack began with precision timing, as Admiral Carter's fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel and immediately engaged the Concord defense platforms and capital ships that guarded Starhold, and the battle was fierce and brutal, and exactly the distraction they needed. Maya's strike team launched in small, fast ships that had been designed for exactly this kind of insertion, and they hugged the station's superstructure, using the chaos of the main battle to mask their approach. And behind them came Ember, with Lyra and Sophie on her back, and the Dragon moved through space with a grace that made the pilots jealous. As station's outer defenses were formidable, but they had been designed to stop ships, not dragons, and Ember tore through shield generators with claws that could cut through dimensional barriers and breathed plasma that burned even in vacuum and reduced weapons platforms to molten scraps. Sophie had designed a specialized harness that let her interface with both Ember's senses and the strike team's communications, and she called out targets and weak points with a clarity that saved lives in minutes they could not afford to waste. They breached the station through a maintenance port that Lyra's intelligence said would be lightly guarded. And they were right, but barely, in the firefight in the corridors. It was intense in close quarters, and Maya fought with the efficiency that came from years of combat experience. Lyra moved like water flowing around obstacles, and her weapons were elegant and deadly, and she protected Maya's flank without being asked, and Maya returned the favor without thinking about it, and together they carved through the Concord guards toward the detention levels. The prisoners they found were from a dozen different species, and all of them had the same haunted look of people who had seen something terrible and been punished for speaking about it, and among them was a human woman in a torn uniform who looked up at Maya with recognition, and Relief Commander Zara Bennett, and I was captured 20 years ago during a reconnaissance mission into Concord space, and I thought I would die here, Maya. Helped her to her feet and handed her a weapon. Not today, and we are getting everyone out, but first we need your intel on what you learned about the Void Eater. Zara's eyes went hardy. Know where their nexus is, and the central coordination point that controls all the possessed hosts across the Concord, and destroy it, and you can potentially free everyone they have taken. That changed everything, and Maya looked at Lyra, who nodded then. We are going to need a bigger army. The liberation of Starhold took hours, and the battle outside raged as Admiral Carter's fleet held off. Concord reinforcements, and inside the station, Maya's team worked methodically to free every prisoner and gather every piece of intelligence they could find. Bember proved invaluable in ways no one had anticipated, and the dragon could sense Void Eater presence even when the parasites were trying to hide, and she led them to infected guards and administrators who had been coordinating the prison, and when those hosts tried to fight embers, stellar fire burned away, parasites leaving the hosts unconscious but alive. Sophie documented everything with scanners and recording equipment because she understood that they would need proof and evidence to convince other species to join their fight. They found children in the cells and entire families that had been imprisoned because one member discovered the truth, and Maya felt rage build inside her because this was what the Concord had become, and this was what had judged humanity unworthy of belonging to galactic civilization. Lyra found her own people among the prisoners and elves who had questioned orders or noticed inconsistencies in leadership behavior, and they looked at her with hope and fear combined, and she promised them that things would change. The final phase of the operation was the most dangerous, as they had to get everyone off the station before Concord reinforcements arrived, in numbers too large for Admiral Carter's fleet to handle. Maya coordinated the evacuation with the precision of someone who had drilled for exactly this scenario, and her teams moved the freed prisoners to commandeered Concord transport ships, while Ember and the strike team provided cover. A Void Eater assassin found them in the chaos, and this one was different from the guards and soldiers they had fought, and it moved with supernatural speed, and its weapons were designed to kill specifically dragons and their bonded riders. Lyra saw it coming for Maya, and threw herself between them and the parasitic tendril that extended from the assassin's body like a living weapon, and it struck her in the chest and began to burrow toward her heart. Ember screamed, and the sound was like stars dying, and she unleashed a burst of stellar fire, so intense that it turned the assassin to ash in an instant and burned away.
Ow.
The parasite trying to infest Lyra, but the damage was done, and Lyra collapsed. Maya caught her, and for a moment panic overwhelmed. Training, stay with me, and you are not allowed to die after everything we have been through. Alira's breathing was shallow and her eyes were unfocused, but she managed a weak smile. I told you humans were stubborn, and now I understand why the Void Eaters fear you. Sophie arrived with medical supplies, and her hands moved with steady competence as she stabilized Lyra well enough to move her, and Ember hovered over them with distress radiating from every scale. They made it back to the fleet with minutes to spare before the station's defenses collapsed completely, and Admiral Carter ordered a retreat as more Concord ships arrived, and the Liberation Force jumped to faster-than-light travel. With hundreds of freed prisoners and intelligence that would change the course of the war in the medical bay, Lyra recovered slowly in awe. Maya spent every free moment beside her, despite the demands of command and debriefing and planning the next operation. When Lyra finally woke fully, she found Maya asleep in a chair beside her bed, and Ember curled up on the floor nearby. And for a moment she just watched them and felt something she had not felt in years, and hope. Maya stirred and opened her eyes, and when she saw Lyra was awake, her expression shifted from exhaustion to relief so profound it was almost painful. You scared me, and I thought we lost you. Lyra reached out and took Maya's hand, and neither of them acknowledged how natural. The gesture felt my people have a saying, and the bonds forged in fire burn brightest, and I think I understand now why I was. The news of Starhold's liberation spread through the underground networks of the Concord like fire through dry grass and everywhere. Species that had lived in fear began to whisper about the humans and their elf ally, and the dragon that burned away the darkness, and for the first time in generations, beings across the galaxy felt something dangerous and electric, and it was Hope Maya Torres. Stood in the command center on Bastion Prime and watched tactical displays that showed rebellion, breaking out on 17 different worlds in every day. Brought new messages from species wanting to join the fight in every day. Brought new responsibility that weighed heavier than any weapon she had ever carried President Luna Williams had. Promoted her to Admiral and given her command of what they were calling the Liberation Fleet, and it was a grand name for a collection of human dreadnoughts. And refitted cargo ships and vessels from a dozen species that had fled Concord persecution. But it was growing, and that mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. Lyra had become the public face of the rebellion, and her broadcasts with Ember beside her reached millions of beings across Concord space, and she spoke with passion and conviction about freedom and truth and the need to stand against ancient evil, and her words inspired both fear in the Concord leadership and courage in those who heard her message. The elf warrior had moved through the transformation from fugitive to symbol, with grace that Maya both admired and worried about, because she knew what happened to symbols. When movements failed, they stood together in Maya's office late one night, reviewing intelligence reports and planning logistics for the next phase of operations, and the comfortable silence between them had become something neither could imagine living without. Zara Bennett's information about the Void Eater Nexus had been verified by 3 independent sources, and the target was confirmed in the Eternal Citadel at the galaxy's core, and a living megastructure that had existed since before most species achieved spaceflight, and now they knew it was powered by the stolen life force of trillions of beings and protected by the entire Concord military. It was impossible, and it was suicide, and it was the only way to end the war before the parasites could spread further. Admiral Helen Carter entered without knocking, and her face carried the weight of bad news. Our scouts report that Concord is mobilizing everything they have, and they are pulling ships from border patrols and defensive positions and concentrating them around the Citadel, and they know we are coming. Maya nodded because she had expected nothing less. How long do we have? Carter consulted her datapads. Zara's analysis suggests the Void Eaters are preparing to use the Nexus for something big and possibly opening a permanent rift to their home dimension, and if they succeed, millions more parasites will flood into our reality, and we are looking at days, not weeks. Lyra stood abruptly, and her face was pale. My people's archives spoke of such an event, and it happened once before in the distant past, and an entire galactic arm was consumed before the rift was closed and billions died. Maya felt cold settle into her stomach, but her voice remained steady. Then we attack now with whatever we have ready, and we cannot wait for perfect conditions. President Williams joined them via holographic communication, and her expression showed the burden of command. The Council has voted, and we commit everything to this assault, and every ship, and every soldier, and every soldier, and every resource humanity has built over thousands of years of exile, and if we fail, there will be nothing left to rebuild. With Maya looked around the room at the faces of people she trusted and respected, and who had become more than colleagues over the months of fighting together. Then we make sure we do not fail. The preparation took 72 hours, and they were the longest hours of Maya's life, as ships gathered and troops drilled and intelligence teams worked around the clock to find any advantage they could exploit. Sophie Torres had become Ember's primary handler and combat rider, and the young engineer had designed weapons and systems that worked with the dragon's abilities in ways that seemed almost magical, and together they represented something new and unprecedented, and possibly the key to victory. Maya found Sophie in the hangar working on Ember's flight harness, and the dragon watched with patient intelligence as the young human made adjustments. Your mother is scared, and she tries to hide it, but I can see it, and she is scared of losing you in this battle, Sophie. looked up at Maya, and her eyes held determination that reminded Maya of herself at that age. And I am scared of losing her, but we both know this has to be done, and the Void Eaters will not stop unless we stop them. And besides, I have Ember, and together we are pretty hard to kill. The dragon made a sound that might have been agreement or amusement, and her scales rippled through colors that somehow conveyed confidence. Maya hugged her daughter and for a moment let herself be just a mother. Instead of an admiral, come back to me and both of you, and that is an order, Sophie. Returned the hug fiercely. We will, and I promise, Lyra found Maya on the observation deck hours before the fleet was scheduled to depart, and they stood together watching the organized chaos of final preparations through the massive viewport. I never expected this when I fled the Concorde, and I thought perhaps I would die alone trying to warn someone, anyone, about the threat, and instead I found you and your people. And something I did not know I was looking for. Maya turned to face her, and the starlight painted Lyra's features in silver and shadow. What did you find, Lyra? Met her eyes with an intensity that made Maya's breath catch home and purpose and youth. Moments stretched between them, filled with everything they had not said and everything they might not get the chance to say. If the coming battle went wrong, Maya closed the distance between them and kissed Lyra with all the emotion she had been holding back for months, and the elf warrior responded with equal passion. And for a few precious moments, the war and the responsibility and the impossible odds all faded away. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, and Lyra rested her forehead against Maya's. Wait for happens tomorrow. I want you to know that coming to humanity was the best decision I ever made. Maya held her close and felt the steady beat of Lyra's heart. We are going to survive this, and both of us, and then we are going to build the future we have been fighting for, and together. Fleet assembled in formation, and it was the largest force humanity had ever gathered, and alongside human ships flew vessels from 19 different species, all united by a common cause and all willing to risk everything for freedom. Maya stood on the bridge of the Eternal Sentinel and felt the weight of command settle onto her shoulders like familiar armor, and beside her stood Lyra in combat armor that had been specially designed to work with her bond to Ember, and around them the crew worked with efficient precision and mineral. Carter commanded the vanguard that would break through the initial Concorde defensive line, while Maya led the main assault force directly toward the Citadel, and Sophie and Ember would penetrate the megastructure itself with a team of specialists to destroy the Nexus from within. President Williams appeared on every screen throughout the fleet, and her voice carried to every ship and every soldier. Today, we fight not just for humanity, but for every species that values freedom over control. And today, we prove that the exiled can return and that ancient evil can be defeated. And today, we show the galaxy what courage looks like when everything is at stake. The fleet jumped too faster than light travel, and Maya felt her heart hammering with anticipation, and fear and determination combined. They merged at the galaxy's core in a region of space so dense with stars that it was never fully dark, and the eternal citadel hung there like a cancer and a marvel combined, and it was beautiful and terrible and wrong in ways that made Maya's instincts scream. The Concorde fleet was waiting, and it was larger than anything intelligence had suggested, and Maya realized with sick certainty that every ship and every resource the parasites controlled had been pulled back to defend this one location. The battle began with a fury that eclipsed anything Maya had experienced, and thousands of ships clashed in the space around the Citadel, and energy weapons painted the void with colors that hurt to look at. And ships died in flowers of flame that bloomed and faded in seconds. Admiral Carter's vanguard hit the Concorde line like a hammer, and her tactical genius showed as she exploited weaknesses and created openings that should not have existed, and the Liberation fleet poured through gaps she carved with blood and determination. Maya commanded her forces with the skill that came from years of experience and the desperate creativity that came from fighting with everything on the line, and around her, the crew executed her orders with precision born from trust and training. Lyra stood at the tactical station and coordinated with her rebel forces and provided intelligence about Concorde formations and weaknesses, and her presence on the bridge had become as natural as breathing. The Eternal Sentinel took hit after hit, but the ship was built to endure. And Maya kept pushing forward toward the Citadel and creating a path for Sophie and Ember to make their run, Sophies. Voice came over the communications channel, and it was steady despite the chaos we are going in. And Ember says she can sense the Nexus, and it is scared. And good Maya wanted to tell her daughter to be careful and to come back safely and to not take unnecessary risks, but she knew Sophie would do what needed to be done regardless. The battle for the Eternal Citadel entered its 8th hour in space around the UHCito. Megastructure had become a graveyard of broken ships and dying stars, and Maya Torres watched through burning eyes as her fleet fought with desperation that tactics and training and became something primal and unstoppable. Admiral Carter's vanguard had been reduced to half strength, but they held the line against Concord reinforcements and bought time measured in blood and sacrifice, and Maya knew that history would remember this day regardless of how it ended. The bridge of the Eternal Sentinel alarms screamed and damage reports flooded in. The ship shuddered under impacts that should have destroyed lesser vessels, but Maya's crew kept fighting because they understood what was at stake, and because their admiral stood firm, and because Lyra Starweaver fought beside them with grace that inspired even in the darkest moments. The sensor feed from Sophie's team inside the Citadel showed corridors of living metal and chambers that pulsed with stolen life energy and defenses that seemed designed by minds that understood suffering as an art form. Sophie's voice came through communications, and it was strained, but steady. We have reached the outer chamber of the Nexus, and Ember can feel it now, and it is aware of us, and it is afraid, but also angry, and we are going to finish. This Maya wanted to order her daughter to retreat and to find another way and to stay safe, but she knew Sophie had inherited her stubbornness and her courage and her absolute refusal to quit when everything depended on success. Be careful, and I love you, Sophie's response was immediate and fierce. Love you too, Mom, and see you soon inside the Citadel. Sophie and her team faced the final barrier, and it was a door of crystallized darkness that hurt to look at. Directly and beyond it lay the Void Eater Prime, and the original parasite that had orchestrated galactic corruption for millennia roared, and her stellar fire struck the door, and for a moment nothing happened, and then cracks appeared and spread, and the door shattered into fragments that dissolved into nothingness. The chamber beyond was vast, and at its center floated a being that existed partially in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and it was beautiful and terrible and wrong in ways that made Sophie's mind rebel against perceiving it. The Void Eater Prime spoke, and its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, and it offered everything Sophie had ever wanted, and everything humanity had been denied, and peace and acceptance and a place in the galaxy. And all she had to do was surrender and become a host, and bring her mother and Lyra and all of humanity into the collective. Sophie felt the temptation like physical weight, because part of her wanted to believe the promises and wanted to end the fighting and wanted her people to finally be accepted. Ember's presence in her mind burned away the lies like morning sun destroying fog, and the dragon showed her the truth and showed her countless civilizations that had accepted similar offers and been consumed, and showed her the price of surrender. Sophie raised her weapons, and her voice was clear. Humanity does not surrender, and we do not bow, and we do not accept control, and you exiled us because you feared what we could become, and now you will learn that fear was justified. The battle that followed existed partially outside normal space, and Ember fought the Prime across dimensions, while Sophie and her team destroyed the physical anchors that kept the Nexus stable and tied it to reality outside the Citadel. Maya felt the moment when everything changed and sensors showed energy readings spiking to impossible levels, and the megastructure began to collapse in on itself. Lyra gasped and grabbed Maya's arm with sudden understanding. Sophie did it, and the Nexus is failing, but we need to get everyone out now, because when it goes, it will take the entire Citadel with it. Maya's mind raced through calculations and trajectories and the cold arithmetic of survival. All ships retreat to minimum safe distance and recall all fighters, and someone, get me a line to Sophie's team. The communications officer shook his head with frustration, showing we lost contact when the Nexus started failing, and something is blocking transmissions from inside the Citadel. Maya felt ice in her stomach and looked at Lyra, and saw her own fear reflected back she as Ember. And they will get out, and they have Tootha. Citadel's collapse accelerated, and chunks of the megastructure broke away and dissolved into energy that lashed out at nearby ships, and the Concord fleet that had been defending the structure suddenly broke formation and fled as their possessed commanders realized the Nexus could no longer protect them across the galaxy. Something fundamental shifted, and beings who had been controlled by the Void Eaters for years or decades suddenly gasped and woke as if from nightmares, and the parasites that had ridden their minds burned away like morning frost under sunlight. Concord homeworlds and military stations and diplomatic outposts, leaders collapsed and civilians screamed, and chaos spread like wildfire as entire governments realized they had been puppets for ancient evil Maya. Watched the Citadel tear itself apart and searched desperately for any sign of Sophie or Ember, and found nothing but energy readings and debris. Then a flash of color caught her eye, and through the destruction came Ember with wings spread wide and Sophie on her back along with the surviving members of the infiltration team, and the dragon moved with exhaustion. But also triumph. Maya felt relief so profound. She nearly collapsed, and beside her, Lyra made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. That is my bonded and never doubt a star dragon when she makes a promise, Sophis. Voice crackled over communications, and it was ragged but filled with fierce joy. Nexus destroyed and Prime eliminated, and requesting permission to come home, Maya had to clear her throat twice before she could speak permission. Granted, and get your tail back here before your mother has a heart attack. The Liberation Fleet regrouped and counted losses that were staggering and celebrated victories that had seemed impossible hours before. And around them, the Concord fleet scattered and ran as the Void Eater control network collapsed completely. Admiral Carter's voice came over. Fleet communications, and it was weary, but satisfied. Well done, everyone. And we just changed the galaxy forever. And drinks are on me when we get back to Bastion. Prime. The journey home took 3 days, and Maya spent much of it with Sophie and Lyra and Ember, and together they tried to process what they had accomplished and what it would mean for the future. The galaxy was in chaos, and the Concord had dissolved into its component species, and governments that had been allies for centuries suddenly found themselves without common leadership or purpose, and into that chaos humanity stepped with offers of alliance and assistance and hard-won wisdom. About surviving exile, President Williams called an emergency session to discuss humanity's next steps, and the council chamber on Bastion Prime was packed with representatives from a dozen species who had fought alongside humans and now wanted to build something new together. Victoria Hayes stood, and for once, her skepticism was replaced with cautious optimism. We have an opportunity to reshape galactic civilization and to build something better than what came before, but we must be careful not to become what we fought against. Admiral Carter nodded in agreement. We offer partnership, not control, and we share what we learned during our exile, and we help species that were oppressed by the Void Eaters rebuild their worlds and their governments. Slira spoke, and her voice carried authority that came from being the bridge between humanity and the wider galaxy. My people, the elves, must face what we allowed to happen, and we must acknowledge our role in perpetuating the system that enabled the parasites. But I believe we can do better, and I have seen what humans and elves can accomplish together. She looked at Maya, and the emotion between them was clear to everyone present. We proposed the formation of the Free Galactic Assembly and a coalition built on voluntary cooperation and mutual defense and equal representation, and everything the Concord claimed to be, but never was. The debate lasted hours, but in the end, the vote was unanimous, and humanity would help lead the creation of a new galactic order. Alongside the species they had once been forbidden to contact. Months passed, and the galaxy slowly healed from centuries of corruption and manipulation, and the Free Galactic Assembly grew stronger as more species joined and contributed their knowledge and resources. Maya Torres became the first human Grand Admiral of the Assembly Fleet, and her tactical genius and experience became invaluable as they worked to maintain peace across hundreds of worlds. Lyra Starweaver took the role of Assembly Ambassador and traveled constantly with Ember to worlds that needed help rebuilding or mediating disputes, or simply seeing proof that the Void Eaters were truly scifistories. Pioneered the Dragon Rider Corps and worked with the Star Dragons who emerged from hiding, now that their ancient enemies were defeated. And together, they became a symbol of the new age and proof that different species could bond and work together toward common goals. Elves underwent profound cultural changes, and many chose to leave their traditional territories and settle in regions that had been human space, and slowly the barriers between species began to break down. Maya and Lyra maintained their relationship despite the demands of their positions and stole moments together whenever their duties aligned, and those moments became the foundation of something that neither had expected to find in the chaos of War. One evening they stood together on the observation deck of the new assembly headquarters, and